So there we go. All right. So like I said, I'm not going to say much about it. You're going to triangularize this domain. We'll show you how it does it in a package as we go. But assume assume we have a black box that does this for us. Okay? That's a good assumption to make. All right. So now we say, well, what am I going to build on here, right? I've got this domain. I've got it all triangularized up. How do I approximate solutions at any point in my computational domain? So you've got to pick interpolating functions. And this starts getting to the meat of the mathematics of what we want to be working with. And so I want to start off with a simple picture. We'll do a 1D case first. So that's 2D. And I have a couple points, let's say. And I have some function. Let's say this is, and let's say this is my exact solution here. I don't, of course, presumably I don't have an exact solution, right? That's why I'm going to compute this thing. But let's suppose I did, and that's what it looked like. How would I approximate, let's say, this function between these 2 points? That's really what you're asking. Well, if we go back to kindergarten, maybe even pre-kindergarten, what we did with points is you labeled them 1, 2, 3, and you drew the line between them, right? So that, you've learned linear interpolation since you were like little, right? You didn't call it that. Neither did any of your friends. And if they did, they weren't friends for long. So what you would do is you say, hey, the simplest thing is, and just even to the naked eye, is to sort of say, well, why don't I just approximate that by that? Simple idea. And then you become sophisticated in life later. You're all mathy. You know more stuff. And you might say, hey, that's just so amateur to do it line. Here's my line fit, by the way, right? So I could start thinking about, here's my approximation. I know about parabolas because I went 7th grade. And in 7th grade, you said, hey, I could do something fancier. And you could. You could make a parabola that went through this. And maybe let's draw that with a dotted line. Maybe there's your parabola. You see it does a little bit better. It can catch some of it better. So there are different options for how to represent the points in between here. Now, obviously, what I've done is drawn the exact solution, but in practice, you're not going to have it. But suppose it does something. It's not going to do what your line or your parabola does. Okay? But the shorter the distance I take between here, the better these two are going to do for you. Okay? So in 1D, these things can work. And by the way, if you do it with linear functions here, this is called a simplex element. It's not contagious. Seriously. Okay. This is my element, this line. The simplex element is basically linear functions. Okay? Then there's complex elements. And it's not linear. It's still polynomial. It's not nonlinear. Just it's, you know, you could use x squared. You use a parabola. Okay? Higher order polynomials. Higher order polynomials. HOP. Okay. And then, so I'll leave those two right there for now. So you see here, I've already represented for you a simplex and a complex element for 1D. All right. Let's go to 2D. And let's talk about how we might represent our solution in 2D. Okay. Everything is going to be triangle. So the question is, when I have a triangle and I want to represent that surface is a plane, right? I have this triangle piece, and this is the plane that connects these 3 points. Okay? So when you start thinking about what this plane is represented as, you could, simplest thing to do, simplest plane that goes through 3 points is, let me just make sure I stay consistent with my notes. That right there, right? A, B, and C are determined by forcing this function to go through the 3 boundary points. This is a simplex. It's still linear polynomials. Okay? This is mostly what we're going to be working with. Okay. Now, I could pick higher order polynomials. Suppose I wanted to do the equivalent of, let's say, a quadratic. Right? So something like I did over there where I said, hey, you know, parabola might give me a better fit. So why don't what would a parabola look like in this higher order space? Well, if I have my triangle, then my complex elements would look like the following. I can represent the solution here, let's say by some complex elements, what I had before, but now I put in parabolic terms, quadratic terms. I have x squared, y squared, and a mix x, y. 3 more coefficients, but I only have 3 points of constraint, so I need more points of constraint. So typically, for a complex element, you might need some extra points. So let me put in 3 more points. So now, this is how I'd represent my triangle. I have more points on it. One might imagine that this might be more accurate, right? One thing we've learned about accuracy is if you start taking, even when we started doing, when we did our Taylor expansions for derivatives, right? The more terms we kept, the more neighbors we relied on, the more points constrained our stuff, and we got accuracy out of it. So use complex elements. The only reason you'd want to use complex elements is basically for improving your accuracy. You could also use multiplex. Much like that giant multiplex screen you might go to this holiday break at your local mall, if you grew up in a mall culture. You know what the multiplex is. There it is. It's like that thing, movies. Multiplex would give you something like this. Oop. A plus bx plus cy plus, you get one mixing term. You have 4 points, 4 things you got to satisfy. You pick A, B, C, and D to satisfy them. So this is a multiplex element. Now, multiplex is interesting because it looks a lot like, a little bit like finite difference. And multiplex, if you're working with rectangles, it's hard to resize them as you go. Like, for instance, watch this trick. If I want to go from fairly big triangles to smaller ones, right, I just go like this. See how I did that? It's not even an optical illusion. I just made them smaller as I went. Can I do that with rectangles? No. Unless I really do an optical illusion. Okay? So, no, because that triangle is, I can make them, you know, once I pick this, it's kind of like everybody else has to, it's like a brick, and you're laying out a patio. Anybody done this? Because you guys don't have homes. But I have a home. Okay, some people have homes. If you have a home one day, it's really important that you understand that bricks are hard to change size. Okay? Now, there's a thing called a hammer and a chisel, but it does feel a little amateur when, and you do this when no one is looking, like, oh, damn, didn't quite fit. Not that I've ever done such a thing, ever in my life, like 3 weekends ago or something. Okay, so this is what we're going to work with. These are our basic structures that we're going to construct our solutions on. Yeah?
So the complex one,
yeah,
you're not making the derivatives of that agree at the corners, or do they automatically agree? You're adding points to get the extra constraints?
I'm adding points, yeah.
It's like a spline. Let's say make the derivatives agree, and that's their extra constraint? Or
yeah, so for a spline, so here we're not going to put any constraint. So the The degrees of freedom you pick here are dependent upon how many constraints you're going to put on it. The only constraint here is it has to go through the points. We're not going to put a derivative constraint on it or a second derivative constraint. Like with a spline, what you normally do with a spline is you make it really smooth, which means that, oh, not only am I going to enforce, for instance, that it goes to the points, but that when I go across here, I want these derivatives to be smooth. All of a sudden, you have extra constraints. That's not what's going on here.